Lots of transfer portal news to discuss today on Locked On Seminoles, including the return of Biscuit.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Today, we are going to discuss a few different things that surround the transfer portal. And we're also going to discuss at the end, Tim Harris Jr., the new receiver coach for the Seminoles, somebody I know from his time at Miami and UCF. Great guy, by the way. And I'm also going to, for those of you that are curious and don't have enough time to watch this entire show right now, I'm going to separate that and make it its own show later as well. So you'll have a separate segment, if you will, later on. But first off, I want to talk about what the Noles are trying to accomplish and how they can learn a few lessons. And we're going to talk about the Biscuit, the return of him and Omar Graham. There's some really interesting portal news over the last 24, 48 hours, and it just seems to be churning out. So let's hit that now. Number one, if you don't remember, Markeston Douglas was a tight end for the Noles. He transferred to Arizona State. He is coming back to Tallahassee. If you have paid any attention to the portal and the needs for the Noles heading into the 2025 season, tight end is definitely on the list. I think they need two, most likely, depending on how you want to do it. With Douglas being added, I'm positive it's two because he's a traditional, downhill, big-bodied player. He's 6'5", 275, maybe bigger. And he's probably going to play attached. He could be the H-back too, don't get me wrong, but he's borderline an offensive lineman. He hasn't had elite run blocking or pass blocking grades, but I think that he can be if he's focused. And he's just so massive, if nothing else. That's a guy in goal line, short yardage. You can throw him the ball because let's be honest, he's hard to miss it at his size. And two, most teams think he's just going to be a blocker, play action, short yardage, or goal line. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Noles use him there. And finally, Biscuit is a guy that came back in part because he knows Norvell, he knows the system. It's a fit both ways. As the saying goes, plug and play. You need guys that you can put into your offense that are not going to take forever. Florida State's coming off 2-10. These coaches know they need to do a much better job that are returning from the 24 staff, and the guys coming in to Florida State know they need to help revitalize this program, or none of them are going to be around much more than a year, maybe two. So with that being stated, I think Douglas is probably a sign that Florida State is looking for familiarity. And we're going to talk about some UCF guys going to visit, et cetera, that I think are important. And we're also going to talk about the ability for them to get Omar Graham back. Let's talk about that now. I was surprised when I saw his name go in the portal. I didn't post an episode. Literally, I mean, I could have, but I'm like, is that going to stick? And then I bring it up on the show that he's leaving. And I'm like, that's a big loss. It took a little longer, but now it's been announced that he is going to stick. That is very important. Knows, again, the ins and outs of being at Florida State University. He's a veteran player now. He's been around. He really improved during the back half of the 2024 season. Was he an All-American caliber player? No, but he got a lot better. He had a few big sticks, too, where he really smoked some guys. I think that's important. Bigger body guy will fit Tony White's defense wholeheartedly, because he can be an inside linebacker and truly be a power guy that you need in a 3-3-5. He will also be a leader. He'll be able to take on some of the role with the younger guys. They've got a couple of kids they had in the freshman class that redshirted. I'm sure they're going to look to him, Blake Nicholson, who I'll talk about just momentarily, and they're going to have a little bit of a helping, if you will, for him, even though it's a new system, because he's going to be counted on to help Tony and everybody else on the staff get people lined up and put in the right places. That's something that I unfortunately spent way too much time talking about in 2024. Run gap fits, lack of effort, two guys going to the wrong gap or to the same gap and didn't even matter at that point because there's another gap that's wide open and there goes a running back if you remember to the Clemson game, there was a play where, it's unfortunate, but it was one of the most generic plays Clemson ran the entire game. The running back didn't get touched till he got to the third level. Linebacker followed, and guess what? Right behind the defensive line, what are you doing? There goes a big gap. I think with the experience now at the linebacker level, Nicholson played a ton, and so did Omar. Those two just alone, that'll help. But you don't need one of them. You needed both. So again, it was surprising to me when Omar got in the portal, but he is back. That is very important. Also on the front of continuity and how things work, I want to take about 2 minutes here, maybe 3, and just bring up something that's very ironic. It's amazing to me that I'm using this as a school to kind of go by, but I think Florida State is taking a playbook part of what Pittsburgh did over the last few years. They learned the hard way with the transfer portal. Now, obviously, the Panthers have one of the most hardline old school coaches in college football. That's not a newsflash. But last year, he openly admitted when they lost several pretty good players at the portal, he wasn't worried. And he kind of bragged about it, how they started this season. They were pretty good. One of the reasons he said, if you just want to be here because of money, we don't need you. I think Florida State is in that boat now too. Like let's be honest. This has been discussed many different places, including the Locked On Seminoles YouTube page and the comments in various places over the last 6 months. And it's true. They literally bent over and accepted that some players wanted more money than they probably should have got. It was a high risk, high reward thing, and they got burned. Not going to go into names, specifics, and all that, but I don't think we're going to see that as much. Part of it, I mean, let's be honest, the Chromahawk News, if you haven't listened to it, what their asking price was north of $800,000 by multiple sources. So I haven't talked to Luke, etc. I haven't talked to his dad, but if that's the case, that's a lot of money for a guy that's not proven. They stood their ground, whether you agree with it or not. I think they want to go with guys that just want to be here a lot more, and they want to build a foundation. I'm okay with that. I think it's a really good move. And again, if you can win at Pittsburgh doing that, I know you're going to do it at Florida State. No offense to Pittsburgh, but the two programs are not on the same playing field when it comes to the ability to attract top talent, whether high school, junior college, or the transfer portal. That being stated, let's see if that becomes a true pattern. I don't know what they're paying Biscuit. I don't know what they're paying Omar, etc. There's going to be some wheeling and dealing, but I don't think Florida State's going to go all in, especially in a season coming up. They're not, let's be honest, 2025 is not going to see Florida State make the playoff, barring something so wild I can't even imagine it. Then again, we did go through that in 2024, so I digress. But you're going to see that a little bit. Also, from that point, Louisville got hammered this year. They were up and down like a yo-yo, despite having quite a bit of talent. They did the opposite of Pittsburgh. So one of the other ACC teams that Florida State, quite honestly, has had some battles with over the last 10, 15 years, you're talking about a team that, quite frankly, screwed up. They had guys even leave last spring that came in and then left before the semester was over. All money stuff. You got to learn from that. And I think Florida State is. And some of the guys that I'm going to talk about next, they're going to be important because Florida State, quite frankly, needs good role players and starters. Not one or the other, both. And if you do not have that and play complementary football when you're rebuilding your roster, quite frankly, you have no chance to win. Next up on Locked On Seminoles, we're going to run down the latest transfer portal news, visits, concerns, guys they're going to get, maybe not get. That is next on Locked On Seminoles. Game Time has the opportunities for you if you need tickets. I don't care what it is, if it's a play, if it's going to the movie theater, and especially for a guy like me, NFL is where it's at. I was just on the Game Time app, checking it out, looked at the Jaguars ticket scene. They got a game coming up with the Jets. Had no idea what the ticket prices were. You can get tickets up in the nosebleeds for $20. You can get really good seats for $150, $160, and I'm talking about really good seats. And they even have Game Time picks. It's right on the app. You just click on it. It'll show you all the really good prices, lower prices. Boom. One click. It's very, very easy. Also, with this app, this is something that I bring up quite often. You can see the view of the field from your phone or your tablet. Boom. Right there it is. All you have to do, again, is download the Game Time app. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. There is quite a bit of transfer portal news, and I didn't even know how to organize this, but that's where we're at. This is the 5th day as I do this podcast of the portal being open. And I quite frankly think Florida State is in a better spot than I would have anticipated. I'm being kind. I didn't even know if they'd have their DC by this point. They just got Tim Harris as receiver coach. Talk about him in about 10 minutes. They got Gus as OC. They got Herb Hammond, O-line coach, really good O-line coach. They're probably going to have the linebacker situate. I'll get into that when it comes time fairly soon. But this is way ahead of schedule. So 2 things before I get to names. They're spending more money than I thought, and they did their due diligence as an overall athletic department. That cannot be understated. Or excuse me, overstated. It is vital. You must get the ducks in a row here because the people doing the evaluations, if they're not in the building, and the portal opens, you're behind the 8 ball. So congrats to Florida State with that. And with that being stated, I have a few guys that I want to discuss that are going to visit Florida State. Some I think are important, and there's really no order to this, by the way, because again, there's a lot of guys. But remember, you need not only starters, you need role players, especially if the guys have any kind of ability to know the system that they previously played at least similar, or if it's one of the guys from Nebraska or UCF, which is going to be a common theme here. And we start with that. Just as a note, and I will go in deep dive on Saturday or Sunday, probably tomorrow, but maybe Sunday. Maybe I do one for each day. James Williams and Jamari Butler, pass rushers, defensive linemen that played at Nebraska. They're allegedly going to visit. As a quick note, the portal's not like recruiting. It's not as concrete, if you will. You're going to see a little more fluctuation when guys get there, et cetera. It's not as set like if high school kids visit in June, it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, almost every time, et cetera. Maybe Saturday morning. This is a little more wild, how long the visits last, et cetera. So news is a little more fluent and certainly not as transparent. With that being stated, you're talking about 2 really good players. Jamari Butler, he is from the Mobile area. That is a kid that is going to be a grad student. He could play your strong side defensive end in a 3-3-5. James Williams, an athletic kid, 6'5", 6'6", 250, a pass rusher that can play that stand-up jack position. I'm not sure what they'll call it at Florida State, but he's essentially the 4th defensive lineman, but he's in a 2-point stance. Plug and play. Know the system. Productive. Proven. Height, weight, size. They have all the measurables. Again, I will get more in depth with them over the weekend, but I just want to mention that again. If they do make the visit early this week, you got to think that Florida State's in a pretty good spot. They love Coach White. They played in the system and been successful, and Florida State is reportedly ardently recruited by multiple sources. So let's see how that plays out early next week. But I also want to bring up something else. Stephon Thompson is going to visit, and like I mentioned a little bit ago about Omar Graham, he has the size to play backer in a 3-man front. That's not a lock. Like DJ Lundy was a big guy. He could have played him, but he's out of eligibility, but he could have played in it. I think you're looking at a situation that despite him just having 27 tackles and 2 pass breakups last year, he could get considerable reps at Florida State. It's not like the Noles are super deep at linebacker. They got to figure it out. They got some different guys that are young guys that are coming up the roll, up the depth chart that are good players, but they don't have any production in this yet. We don't know. And they were recruited to a different scheme. So where exactly do they play? How fast do they pick up this? We don't know. Florida State needs special teams players as well. A guy like Thompson, who is going to be a grad student, a very good addition, in my opinion. Florida State is involved with him. 6'1", 240. Knows the system, knows Coach White. That is very, very valuable. Keep an eye on him. And there's other guys, too, that Nebraska may lose to Florida State and just in general. But I think it's important to bring those guys up. You just can't have enough of them. Moving to an interesting player, this is the kind of in between, a kid that I know, super guy. Played at Bama, didn't work out. Kendrick Law. This is an offensive player that I think would have been even better at playing nickel, but Bama recruited him to play receiver, which surprises me because Saban recruited him. He's obviously a DB guy. But Kendrick was an elite high school student and an elite high school football player. Running back, wide receiver, DB, did not matter. He was really good. He never caught on at Bama. He had like 10, 15 catches all 3 years that he was there. But he's 5'11", 209, and can really run. I don't know if it's the system or what it was that didn't allow him to be a big-time player. But, I mean, he played against Tennessee and different teams. I think he would be a nice addition for 2 reasons. Number one, well, 3. Great guy. He's going to fit in the locker room wherever he goes. Elite student, personable, one of the best interviews I've ever done. And he's 5'11", 209. He is built like a prize fighter. I mean, yoked. He's going to be a good run blocker. He's a guy you can throw screens to. He's all the little things that you need to see in terms of being a team player. Again, back to that point, like what Florida State's doing, I think it's going to be a little bit more like Pittsburgh. They're going to make educated decisions and not just dump money into kids because they want a bag. Kendrick's a smart guy. I don't think he's going to worry about, this is just my opinion, the money as much as opportunity because he wants to prove himself. Very competitive kid. Can he play outside receiver? Possibly. He could be a slot, and Florida State lost Ja'Kai Douglas. He could at least compete for reps there. And again, this dude is yoked. You want to run him on a reverse, or you just want to put him in the backfield, throw screens or throw the ball out in the flat to him. He can run. He could be a guy that hits as a senior. Florida State is allegedly involved with him. I like him a lot. This past year, had 10 catches for 105 yards, 1 score. I think it's interesting, too, as a blocker, his blocking grade against Auburn per Pro Football Focus, 78.1. Against Georgia, 81.3. He's pretty good. Next, Marcellus Marshall. This is a kid I brought up before, but I did a little more deep dive on him. He's an offensive lineman from UCF. Norvell, Herb Hand, everybody's been involved with him. He's been on a visit. I don't know where it's going to go yet. West Virginia and several other schools are probably involved in some capacity, but he's a kid that's from the state of West Virginia. I don't know his full list, but he's a guy that can get after it, but also wasn't consistent. But then again, he played left tackle, right guard, left guard. He was UCF's handyman, although he has over 2,500 snaps career as a starter. So where they needed him each season per game, Marcellus moved. That is super vital. Florida State's O-line has holes all over it. So signing a guy like this allows the Noles not only to get an experienced player that knows Herb Hand, that knows Gus Malzahn, but it also allows them to get a player that if somebody gets banged up, and maybe the backup behind him is playing pretty well, but he's waiting on Marcellus to leave. Well, that kid slides into the starting lineup, and Marcellus goes from, let's say, right tackle to left guard. That is invaluable. That is team football. That is winning in terms of finding a way to get it done, even if it's just a Band-Aid short term. Got to have guys like Marshall. He's 6'5", 310. This past season for UCF, he played right guard. His pass blocking grade was 74, 87.6 against Arizona State, which is wild. But anyway, he's a good football player, and I think he would bring a lot of continuity, and he would help some of the other transfers and other guys to understand Herb Hand's system. Again, going back to the Pittsburgh theme, like they just looked inward, and it helped their program immensely. I think that's what Florida State's going to have to do, and I think they're kind of going that route because I'm not hearing them just throwing bags of money at some of these elite 5-star kids that either flamed out or just looking for a bag that came out of other programs, and I think that's a good sign. Also, looking at him overall, he was a team captain, and that means leadership's going to be there. Florida State whacked so bad there. A few of the schools, I don't know where all he's going to end up. Houston, Minnesota, Northwestern, San Diego State, Stanford, all over the country. He's got opportunities, but I really don't know which ones are most interested in him. Also, sticking with offensive line, Alex Wolschlager, 6'7", 305. He's from the MAC. Another kid that has a bunch of different opportunities. Herb Hand's been on the phone with him. Offered overall pass blocking and run blocking grade combined is 76.6. He was 74.2 in run blocking. He did have some pass protection problems against Penn State, but everybody does. They got some really good pass rushers. He was only 41.2, but overall his pass blocking grade was 75.3. He's going to be a grad student. Experience, leadership, proven, size, strength. All those things are parts of what Florida State needs. And really, to be honest, they need about everything up front. Just for the record, early on going into the portal, I said they needed minimum 4. I really think it's to the point now. I kind of think they need 5 as a minimum. Like if you get a stud, but 6 would probably be my number. Florida State is such a thin roster on the O-line, and you got to figure somebody's going to get hurt or transfer out. You should shoot for 6. Getting a kid like this, Wolfswager would be a nice addition. So he had 14 starts last year. He's got a Kentucky visit coming up, Kansas State, Georgia Tech, which that's an intriguing school if you're an O-lineman, Northwestern, Pitt, there's that school again, Stanford, Nebraska, Iowa State. Schools all over the country are also very interested in him. When we come back, we're going to talk about Tim Harris Jr. He is the new wide receiver coach for the Florida State Seminoles. I know him from his time coaching at the University of Miami and UCF. Got a lot of recruiting background on him and what he brings to the Noles. That is next on Locked On Seminoles. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The sportsbook app, the FanDuel Sportsbook app, gives you everything you need to place live bets on the National Football League, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Tim Harris Jr. is a really good guy. Before I go into his coaching acumen, this is the kind of person that anybody can relate to. And I urge anybody that's a Noles fan, a booster, somebody runs into him in any way, shape, or form, airport, say hi. Good person. He's the kind of guy that represents whoever he's with in a good manner. He went to the University of Miami, was an elite track athlete. He still holds the 800, I believe, record at the University of Miami. So obviously Tim could run. He is also the son, obviously, as his name is Tim Harris Jr., of Tim Harris. We call him Ice Harris, Booker T. Washington head coach, won multiple state championships down there. Tim Jr. was a part of that program, and he was the head coach for 1 year. And then he went into the coaching profession at the college level. But he grew up in Dade. Remember that one. We'll come back to that here in a minute because it's going to be very important with recruiting. And he spent 6 years at Booker T as offensive coordinator, running back coach, quarterback coach, and then in 2014, the head coach. 2015 to 2020, he was at Florida International as the running back coach. In that season, they went from the year before, like 1,300 yards rushing to almost 1,800 yards the first season he was there. So you get an idea what he's capable of. 2021, he became the offensive coordinator in addition to being the running back coach. And then UCF hired him in 2021 with Gus. Now, he had some pretty good running backs, and I'll go over them in a second, but he was there as the co-OC and running back coach. And I think that's an important part. He's going to understand Gus's mind and give him some different ideas. Hey, when we did this with this player, blah, blah, blah. And there's several different players at Florida State right now, as I'm going to go into, that fit what they did as receivers and running backs. And that's important. They're going to be able to go back and forth and play ping pong on ideas. That's going to help. So 2019, just as an example, then I'll go into the 2022 and 24 seasons, et cetera, at UCF. But FIU, they get some pretty good players, but I didn't expect to see these kind of numbers. 2019 at Florida International, Anthony Jones, a 5'11", 215-pound kid. That's a running back that's similar to like Cam Davis, for instance. 867 yards, 9 touchdowns, 4.6 yards per carry. The backup, Napoleon Maxwell, very similar, 6 foot, 215, 675 yards, 5.3 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns. At UCF in 2022, again, he was co-OC running back coach. for part of the time that he was there. You're talking about a guy that was a part of a really unique running back room. And they had John Rice Plumlee, one of the best guys in the country at quarterback. But Plumlee had 862 yards and 11 scores. Isaiah Bowser was their banger, the bruiser in the middle. He had 799 yards and 16 touchdowns. Red zone and short yardage, they didn't mess around. Bowser was really, really good. He only averaged 3.9 yards a carry because he did so many short yardage carries, but they were consistent with it. And then they had R.J. Harvey, the guy that just went nuts this past year. That was the first year he kind of broke on the scene. 796 yards, 6.7 yards per carry, 5 scores. That is one of the best combinations of run-pass opportunities that I've seen because they had Baker, they had Hudson, they had some other guys. They were pretty darn good on offense. Also, Ryan O'Keefe, this is something to bring up and why I keep talking about running backs and receivers. Tim was a running back coach for most of his time at UCF, but he also was instructive and influential with the receivers. And part of what Gus does in his offense, his slot or his outside receiver will get reverses or they'll use jet sweeps and fakes. As an example, 2022, Ryan O'Keefe, he's a really speedy guy out of Texas, 23 carries, 222 yards, so almost 10 yards a carry. He didn't score, but when you can do that, you're holding the linebackers and the defensive ends and making them hesitate and making them think. When you do that, it gains a very big advantage for your offense. You're playing fast, they're playing slow. Always an edge. Thomas Castellanos, by the way, in 2022, he didn't play a ton at UCF, but 14 carries, 120 yards, 8.57 yards per carry, and a score. So they find different ways for the quarterback, the running backs, no matter what their scheme or style is that they came from, to be really good. And by the way, Bowser and Harvey were transfers. Bowser came from Northwestern. Harvey came from Virginia. So Gus is very accustomed to it. And so is Tim, bringing in transfers and getting them to be very, very productive. 2024, just as an example with the receivers, Kobe Hudson had 47 catches, 770 yards, 16.4 yards per reception, 4 touchdowns. And Randy Pittman, a guy that I brought up on the Thursday show, he's a kid that was originally committed to Florida State. Remember that now. That's a young man that's an H-back, 6'1", 6'2", 230-some pounds, athletic. He had 32 catches, 416 yards, 13 yards per catch, 2 scores. His name's been bandied about with Florida State. I don't know if they're deeply involved with him, but he's a Panama City kid. He went to Mosley. I'd imagine that he's a pretty good bet to be involved with Florida State, but Markeston Douglas is a possibility, and there's a kid named Jaden Platt. I need to learn more about him, but he's a kid that was at A&M, hasn't done much, only had like 27 snaps this year. He's supposedly going to visit Florida State next week, and they already got Markeston Douglas, so are they done at tight end? Are they going to take 2 or 3? How many are they going to do? I think it's minimum 2, but don't forget about Randy Pittman. He's a possibility. 2023, the one year that he went back to his alma mater, talking about Tim Harris Jr. here, Miami's rushing totals comparably are insane. 2022, they had 1,540 yards and 12 touchdowns on the ground. The next season, when Tim got there, 2,251 yards and 24 touchdowns. Now, the talent improved. I'm not debating that. But, I mean, they doubled their touchdowns. You can say it however you like. That's still double the production. That's impressive. As for Tim and recruiting, and this is where it gets just testimonial. I know Tim from seeing him on the recruiting trail, covering him at UCF, and again, great guy. You ever get a chance to say hi to him, highly advise it. He's the kind of guy you want to talk to about because he's A to B. You ask Tim a question, Tim Harris Jr. will give you an answer. A to B. I love that. Whether it's a coaching tip I asked him about, whether it was a player, what he thought about this guy's coming up, guys at UCF, whatever it was, he didn't care. Saw him on the recruiting trail at like Edgewater High School, IMG, South Florida. Saw him all over the state of Florida, wherever I was at a big game. There's a good chance Tim was there. He likes recruiting. He relates to young people. And again, as I noted when I first began this part of the show, Tim Harris is a Dade County guy. He went to the University of Miami. He's coached at FIU. He understands the landscape of South Florida. There is hardly anybody down there that doesn't know him and probably know his father even better. Ice Harris is one of the most historic coaches in South Florida history. Competitive guy, really good dude, but he gets after it. Tim's a little more mild-mannered as junior. Senior is definitely more in-your-face old school, but he got it done at that program, and his son's benefited. He came up that way too. So I think that's good. He's got all kinds of guys that he can bounce ideas off of in South Florida. That's going to help him at Florida State, and it's probably going to help the Noles get guys to Tallahassee. This is a common theme on the Locked On Podcast Network, talking about recruiting. And the Locked On Seminoles, in general, we talk about it constantly. But if you're Florida State, what is the historic balance of this? When the Noles beat Miami for South Florida recruits, they beat Miami on the gridiron a lot more often. That's your rival. You need to beat them. Tim's going to help you get like 1 to 2 more guys a year, in my opinion, just from knowing him, seeing his recruitments, and now having the Florida State logo on his polo when he walks into a high school coach's office. That's important. Florida State's going to be more, let's say, attractive to recruits because head coaches down in South Florida, parents, 7-on coaches, everybody down there, trainers, they know who Tim is. And he's, again, a very likable guy. That's going to benefit the Noles. If Florida State can, I don't see how this wouldn't happen, but if they can combine him, Sertan, and just anybody else that has ties to South Florida from the staff in any way, and they just coordinate it. I mean, Gus has got experience there. The new DB coach from Nebraska does. He's a South Florida guy. He played in the public league. This is a great scenario for Florida State because if nothing else, you should be able to get your roster balanced by this time next year when they're in the portal in 2025, looking forward to the 2026 season. You'll have more of a presence from South Florida from the portal, possibly a junior college player. You never know. In the prep ranks, you'll see a lot more kids coming through. I'm going to mention this podcast numerous times. And again, I'm going to cut this out. As I noted earlier in the show when I did the full show, this is going to be its own little show later on. This is something you should come back and look at in 6 months. Florida State's going to get some kids on campus you might be surprised at, but I won't be. Tim will be involved in that. He's a good recruiter. He's a good guy. He's a good evaluator. And he knows South Florida. Very vital to Florida State's history. Bobby Bowden certainly benefited from it. He's got a couple rings because of what he was able to do with South Florida recruiting. Tim Harris is no fool. He's going to try to do that as well. That's going to lock it up for this edition of Locked On Seminoles. I appreciate everybody coming in today and always making this your first listen. Check me out anywhere you want on the internet, but most notably, I'm on X, FBScout_Florida. You're going to see a lot of portal news for the Noles and other schools. And also make sure you hit that like button, that notification bell, and subscribe to this pod. Truly appreciate it. Everybody have a good one. I will see you again on Saturday.